Posted by u/note Muriel name 124. A man once said, if you want a good story, just ask any random person if there was ever an event in their life they cannot explain. Someone almost always has one weird thing that has happened to them. So Reddit, regardless of whatever you believe about the world, what's your story? I've posted this before, but my wife used to win radio contests, pretty much whenever she wanted to. She won a lot. Like, really, a lot. She had no particular technique. This was across multiple radio stations in several cities, and I have no explanation. Examples, not all. As a teenager, she bought her back-to-school clothes each year by winning shopping gift cards on the radio. When our daughter was a baby, my wife won a year's supply of diapers, video games, t-shirts, and other items. Years later, she won us dozens of tickets to concerts from KROQ in Los Angeles. We went to the Weenie Roast and Acoustic Christmas, big multiple band concerts, almost every year for years. We saw Boingo's Halloween concert multiple years. We saw Jewel at an in-store appearance, and the morning DJs knew my wife well enough that when Jewel was going to teach someone to yodel, the DJ caught my wife's eye to ask silently if she wanted to be the one. She did. My wife flew on a chartered party plane to Vegas to see U2. The ultimate was one time when my brother and his wife were having dinner with us. KROQ was playing in the background and the DJ says caller 106.7 wins tickets to Acoustic Christmas. My wife casually mentions that we can't go, so she hasn't bothered to win tickets. Sister-in-law says, "What do you mean, you haven't bothered to win tickets?" Wife replies, "If we could go, I'd win tickets to go. But we have something else planned and can't go, so I haven't." Sil, "You can't just win tickets, it's Acoustic Christmas." Wife, "Sure I can." Sil, slowly and a bit sarcastically, "Well, we can go, so why don't you win us tickets?" Wife, "Sure, no problem." About an hour later, the very next time, the DJ says caller 106.7 wins tickets to Acoustic Christmas. Wife gets up and casually walks across the room to the phone, picks up, starts dialing. Looks up and says, "Caller 47. Dials. 73. Dials. 89. Dials." Holds out the phone and says, 106.7. Sil gets up, incredulous, and takes the phone. Next thing we hear over the radio is, "Caller 106.7, you win." Followed by Sil saying, "What? This is not KROQ." But it was, and my wife won one of the hardest tickets to get in Los Angeles, competing against the rest of the city, on demand, on the very first try. TL, Doctor, my wife wins radio call-in contests pretty much whenever she wants to, and I have no explanation. This is a dark one. It happened when I was around 11, my parents and I went on a trip to Austria and we visited a theme park. In the theme park was a jumpy thing. There was a 1 meter, 2 meters and 3 meters pole and you could jump down on this huge cushion. I wanted to try and went straight up the highest pole. I've jumped down those poles before a few times, but that time I was just terrified. I don't know why, but all out of a sudden I was shaking and scared for my life. It was this deep kind of fear which I never felt before. My mind was telling me not to jump. Which didn't make sense because I just jumped down there and it was fun. So I let the kid behind me go first. She died. The cushion had a leak and she broke her neck. She was 9 years old. I climbed down and will never forget this. If I had jumped, I would be dead and I can't stop feeling like fate wanted me on that day and not her. I was measuring ingredients for a cake in my apartment when I dropped my blue plastic half-C measuring cup. I heard it go tock as it hit the ground once and then no other sound afterwards. I immediately looked all around for it but it had vanished. By the end of my search I had removed all the drawers, moved the appliances, and checked inside/under/behind everything in the kitchen and surrounding areas. I've moved 3 times since then and never found it. I hope the eldritch horrors the next plane over are enjoying my half-cup skeptical. I'm an ER doctor currently. When I was in med school we had a chronic respiratory failure patient who was DNR/DNI. During our morning rounds, nurse called us to bedside for vital sign check. Guy was deader than a block of wood. No pulse, no breathing, pupils fixed and dilated, etc. My senior resident was like, "This is a great chance for you to confirm your first dead body. We write up his death note, make arrangements, whatever." An hour later, we get called by the same nurse. This guy is alive and talking to me. Sure enough, homeboy is wide awake and chatty Cathy. He got discharged a few days later. I kept tabs on him until I finished med school. He lived at least another 1.5 years. Me and a friend saw a teeny tiny person. This was in the 90s and there was a really nice pub about a mile from where my friend Jason lived, and the walk there from his house took us along one of the canals. This was in England, the West Midlands to be precise. One evening, I'd gone over to his house, we'd walked over to the pub, had a couple of pints, something to eat, and were on our way back. It wasn't late, early evening and still a decent amount of light. We're walking down the track beside the canal when we hear a splash in the water behind us. Turning around, we see, about 40 feet away, the ripples of something moving through the canal towards the bank. Now both of us were keen bird watchers at the time, so we were guessing it was something like a coot or a moorhen. So we were both pretty fucking shocked when what looked like a tiny little naked ass man, about 8 inches tall, climbed out of the water, shook himself off and dashed into the hedgerow. We were both frozen for a few moments before we headed to the spot where the little man had gotten out of the water. Didn't find any trace of him. We got back to Jason's place and spent a couple of hours trying to rationalize it, but there was no other animal or bird that we could think of that we might mistake for a tiny person. Weirdest thing I can think of is this. When I was a freshman in high school, I started getting really into like psychics and stuff, and my friend, now my so, took me to this palm reading / tarot card booth at a Renaissance fair. When I sat down in front of her, she greeted me, then looked behind me, then back at me and said, "You have 4 people behind you." I went into her tent alone. I don't remember much of the reading, just that she mentioned African violets, because one of the spirits behind me had some connection to them. I didn't really think much of it because I didn't know anybody, dead or alive, who liked African violets, and I forgot about it until the following year. The next year, I went to the same booth, with a different lady. My so sat with me. She asked me if I knew anything about African violets, completely unprovoked. I said no. She said I should get them, for the spirit behind me. I left the reading feeling really weird, but again I kind of shrugged it off. 6 months later, I was at a Home Depot with my dad. I separated from my dad to look at the flowers and came across some African violets. I bought them, put them in a new pot, and set them on my windowsill when I got home. 2 minutes later, my mom comes in and asks me if I got anything from the store. African violets, I told her. My mom smiled and sighed, then looked at me and said, "You know, those were your grandmother's favorite flowers." My grandmother died 9 years ago, when I was 11. And when I went back to that booth the following year, they didn't even mention African violets. I know it's not a creepy story or anything, but it still kinda weirds me out. I was homesick sometime during HS, 11th or 12th grade. I was sitting in my computer chair playing Skyrim when my dog, who was usually content by himself and never one for affection, came into my room and laid down staring out my door. Me being alone and this not being his normal course of action, unnerved me a bit, so I closed my door and went back to playing. Not 3 minutes later I hear the voice of my mother calling my name, clear as day. She's a school teacher, so she would have been at work. Shitting myself, I try to be as quiet as possible and lower my TV all the way down to make sure I didn't attract whatever I heard and could hear more clearly, only to hear the bedroom door upstairs slam shut. Sat in my room and noped all day long in silence until my mom came home. I asked her if she was home earlier and denied it. One of the scariest moments of my life. I was going through a tough time and was at my wit's end. I was crying in my car trying to get it all out before I had to walk into work. I had a big decision to make and I said out loud, "I just need a sign." No joke, in that moment the song on the radio said my actual name. I don't have a very common name and I'd never heard this song before. I thought I had lost my mind, but I googled the lyrics and everything I needed to hear was all right there in the song, and it called me by name. I'm not religious at all, but the universe or God or something gave me a damn sign. Had an accident when I fell asleep driving. I went off the road when I reached a T, headed straight into a wooded area going about 50 miles per hour, but ran into a telephone pole's guy wire, heavy cable driven into the ground at a 45-degree angle to the pole. Well, that cable was a godsend because it absorbed most of my kinetic energy and significantly slowed me down. To give you an idea of how much energy it absorbed, it cut into the front end of my car about 2, slicing the battery in half in the process. It also pivoted me around 90 degrees, so I was sideways when I went down a hill into the woods. Rolled the car about 3 times and ended up on the roof. Completely missed all of the trees. I extracted myself from the crash, gathered my stuff and walked away from the accident completely unharmed, was wearing my seatbelt. I walked home, which was about 2 miles, it was 2 a.m. and pre-cell phones. After I got home I noticed about midway on my right thigh, A perfect 1 square of fabric was gone from my khaki pants. I'm talking about a perfect square. The edges were so clean, like it was carefully carved out with a scalpel. No cuts or scrapes on the skin of my thigh. It was surreal and creeped me out. I believe that after I die, I will be presented with this one piece of khaki fabric and be told it wasn't your time. When I went back to the scene the next day, the telephone pole guy wire had snapped, and the pole, while still standing, had been pulled so hard that where it went into the ground, the hole was elongated about 6 before it sprung back. No sign of the square of fabric. Edit, changed inertia to kinetic energy. I'm gonna make this as short as possible, but I was supposed to be flying out to Thailand from Australia. I was also kind of seeing this guy who was flying into Melbourne the same day I was leaving. He asked if I wanted to visit him and spend Christmas with him, but I was pretty set on going to Thailand for Christmas. Night before I was supposed to leave, I had the worst dream. I was standing on the beach and these huge waves just started coming for me. Ended up swallowing me and taking me away. I woke up in the worst sweat ever. Completely freaked me out. Never, ever had such a vivid dream. I can't even explain how real it felt. Anyway, I spoke to the guy the next morning and impulsively changed my ticket to go see him in Melbourne instead. The dream just gave me the creeps that bad. Turns out the Boxing Day tsunami hit right where I would have been staying. Probably a weird coincidence, but makes me think. Oh, and I'm married to that guy now.